Okay, well, we now move to the next representatives, and we have representatives from the Abundant Housing Network, Urban Development Institute of Australia and Australian Community Housing. I understand that the information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, we will ask people to please state their name and capacity in which they appear, starting with the Abundant Housing Network.
Yeah, my name is Jonathan O'Brien. I'm the spokesperson for the Abundant Housing Network Australia.
Okay, Urban Development.
Hello, I'm Andrew Mino. I'm the Head of Policy and Government Relations for Urban Development Institute of Australia.
Community Housing.
Mark Degatati, the CEO of Australian Community Housing.
And I'm Alexandra Raphael, the Director of Policy at Australian Community Housing.
Okay, we're going to give you all 2 minutes each, and if you go over 2 minutes, you get gonged and you have to put your piece of paper on the record and we'll record it for all time. So, Abundant Housing Network.
Thank you, Senator. Our submission to the inquiry is really mainly focused on this question of the national settlement strategy. Our position on that is that the strategy would very much function mainly to make Australia poorer. And that's on the basis of sort of 4 or 5 key points that we outline in our submission, but for the sake of this appearance, we'll focus on the erosion of national productivity. So Australia's largest cities are very much the engines of our economy. 80% or so of our economic activity occurs on just 0.2% of the land. And so if a national settlement strategy is going to divert workers by force or by coercion through urban containment policies, that would create what we call a productivity ceiling. It would deprive workers of higher wages and the productivity benefits that can be found in dense, high-matching labour markets. Because the purpose of a city is not that everyone has a job, it's that everyone has access to a job that maximizes their productivity, their well-being, their happiness, their contentment in life, access to the best job for them. One of the things that's been put forward by advocates of this strategy, for instance, is that you could decentralize our public sector. You could move agencies into regional areas or suburbs. But the big problem with that in the modern era is we typically have dual income households. So if you're moving one person out there, then you also need to move their spouse or their partner out there as well. And that partner will also need to find a highly suitable job match. It's just extremely unlikely that advocates of the strategy can define or design a process that expects to yield the same positive productivity outcomes we currently get from the agglomerative engines of our cities. The costs to the Australian population from a national settlement strategy would be large, and they would be felt in the form of lower productivity, lower wages, and a less prosperous, less sustainable Australia. And for what? In terms of what material benefit exactly would a national settlement strategy be implemented? Why will we carve our nation up in this way? Is it because certain people think our cities are too big? Is it because they'd rather young people and new migrants live somewhere other than where they already do? We implore the committee to ask these questions of the strategy's proponents. The questions you receive will be telling and important. There is no reason to believe that this policy would be anything more than a very expensive failure, and it is on these grounds that the Abundant Housing Network Australia strongly opposes the establishment of a national settlement strategy, and we encourage the committee
We'll come back to you. Okay, now let's go to the urban development.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Time starts now.
Fair enough. Our members deliver the lion's share of new dwellings across the housing spectrum, from affordable housing for CHPs and government all the way through to at-market and master plan communities. In a nutshell, our industry recommends immediate support for productivity by, 1, in addition to revamping the NCC, freezing any remaining NCC changes that increase cost of housing, including NCC 24, exhaust reform proposals that will add up to $25,000 a unit. 2, in addition to the EPPC reform, accelerating the government's housing task force to clear backlogged environmental approvals, holding back tens of thousands of houses. 3, all governments drive faster, cost-effective planning. The federal government can use existing funding to incentivise halving of planning times. 4, review of all federal and state and territory taxes to reduce the burden on property prices rather than merely swapping one tax burden for another. 5, focusing on boosting housing supply through broader federal and state and territory initiatives for median house pricing to benefit all Australians as well as affordable. 6, maintaining rental housing support through existing negative gearing and CGT discounts or equivalents because rental investors provide our only source of rental supply. Overall, we want to see about a 25% reduction in regulatory cost for doing business by 2030 across all of these things. And it's absolutely critical that we get there. Now, the interesting thing about our industry is development and construction not only builds the majority of houses, but it also is a pump prime for the economy. We are 10% or 10.5% of GDP, 9% of full-time employment, and each housing dollar, depending on who you talk to, supports 40 plus sectors and generates $2.90 extra in the wider economy. So Australia's productivity health is significantly boosted by a healthy housing industry. Unfortunately, industries...
Okay, thank you very much.
That's it.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to community housing.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I'll just make 3 observations. The first is that we would encourage the committee not to look at productivity as separate from housing. The ability to have secure, safe, affordable housing has a direct impact on individual families' ability to be economically productive within the economy and help growth. The second thing to think about is that the way we build, clearly we need some reforms in that space. It's taking too long to get from inception to completion on projects, whether that's planning, whether that's regulation. It's an important focus and it's good that the committee is looking at those outcomes. And finally, I think the way we fund and finance housing is really critical. The social and affordable housing sector, which is where we participate. Obviously, the flagship is the HAF in that sector at the moment. It's a fantastic addition to social and affordable housing in this country, but we need to keep looking at ways we can make that more productive and more efficient, and we need to look at things that are not well served by the HAF. Not every project can be funded by a complicated scheme, a complex scheme, I should say, that has high transaction costs. So we should keep looking at that as well.
Thank you very much for your efficiency. That's very productive. So I just have a few questions. I think firstly to urban development. So in terms of the 2022 National Construction Code, do you have any sense of how much that added to the cost of construction?
Yeah, so just let me get my notes, 2 seconds. Assume I'm not a time limit.
No.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Look, those changes were significant impacts to builders and largely they were a little bit impractical in the way they were done, which meant that there was 12 months of people being taken up in costly compliance that froze innovation. But then it increased house prices for some organisations as much as $35,000 or more, simply because of that. So, you know, aside from the issue of getting compliance and being able to do it, it had a massive impact on what affordability was going to look like for housing.
So the current proposal is that the government is going to make some changes to the NCC this year and then have a 4-year freeze. Meanwhile, they have a review into modern methods of construction. I mean, is there a more ambitious approach that could be taken here to reduce the level of red tape?
Well, first and foremost, I think the NCC changes that are yet to come through that were already agreed have to be looked at again because there are other examples which are actually going to cost the industry. And I'll draw your attention to one which is rather catchily named AS 1668.2, which is about apartment exhausts. But basically, although there are a lot of good things in the NCC 2024, this one in particular works in such a way that it's going to add up to $25,000 to costs of housing. So one of the first things we need to do is actually stop any of the existing proposals that are going to go through that are actually going to have a cost to housing. That's your first thing. The second thing is when we start looking...
So
go on.
So you think the 2026 changes will add more cost?
Some of them do. So it's a mixed bag. So the reality is there are some very good changes which will help industry, but there are some which work in such a way, and I won't go through the detail, I'm more than happy to provide it to you guys, but there's some that work in a way that will actually mean that you have to vent up through the top of apartment buildings, which means you lose floor space. It's an incredible amount of cost, and it works out at about $25,000 per apartment to do that. Now, in addition to that, and this is emblematic of the problem that we've got the NCC, these are experts who are looking at this and they're confused about what the impact is going to be. And that's a problem, because even if you were to assume that the industry is not full of people who are experts in these areas, it has to be written in such a way that ordinary builders, small to medium-sized enterprises, can understand it as well as anybody else. And that's simply not been the case.
So what chance does an average builder have of trying to get across a 2,000-page document when they're trying to build a house?
Well, it's an incredibly difficult thing, and this is actually adding to the cost. I mean, we have gone effectively, and, you know, I know you've asked this question previously of other people, but we've basically gone from something which has been providing us with a good standard for housing and the way it should look, to being something which to a certain extent is aspirational and providing best practice on a number of things. Now, we take a very practical stance on this. You've got to look at this in terms of practicality of outcome, i.e. can you actually do it in the time frame that you're asking for? Does it actually work? Is it going to impact affordability of housing? Now, it doesn't mean that if it impacts the affordability, etc., you don't do it. But you need to have had a conscious decision about whether or not what you're going to put in place is going to impact any of these major things. If it's difficult to do, if not, why not? i.e., if it's going to be difficult, why are you doing it?
So, for an average home builder, would they have any prospect of ever being able to read, let alone operationalise, 2,000 pages of gobbledygook?
Well, I know the answer you want me to give you, but I don't know the answer to that question. I would say it's extremely difficult to do so. 2,000 pages is a very steep read for anybody, and they would be doing the best they possibly can. I imagine that a compliance across the board is going to be varied, but the answer to your question is it's very, very hard.
Andrea, I want to ask you about if you could provide on notice what you think a streamlined, cut-down NCC would look like. We'd be grateful. We've been talking about today moving to a more graduated approach, which has just had the basic safety standards as the base, and then optional add-ons if people want to have add-ons. I just want to ask you about EPBC. So after the changes were made with the Labor-Greens deal in November, there appeared to be a bit of a flurry of activity in pushing through some houses on the fast track, but now 6 months later we have no bilateral deals, we have no regulations made. So what's happening with that now?
Well, we're actually in confidential negotiations with government on all of this, and as you can imagine, it's a leviathan to deal with. So there's a lot of stuff to be done in terms of standards, etc., and that's all being worked through. In addition to that, what
doesn't sound very transparent.
Well, the idea is essentially to get the experts in the room to make a call on it, and then when they've got that information, they're putting it out to the public. The problem that we have, obviously, is this is being done on a very tight time frame, so it's extremely difficult to get back information in an appropriate time. But, you know, we're very supportive of getting this done because it has to work for industry. The additional part of that is we're extremely supportive of the Housing Task Force to remove the backlog because, as I think we've said before, Senator, it does not matter what you do in terms of the actual reform legislation. At the end of the day, it comes down to the process and the culture of the organisation that's doing it. Does the industry understand what the new EPA wants to do? Does the new EPA understand exactly what is practical? And that's going to come down to how you actually administer that culture. And that's not about rules and legislation. That's literally about everyone being able to come to an agreement.
Okay, I just want to ask Abundant Housing something. So what do you make of this National Construction Code thingy? It's gone from 200 pages to 2,000. Everyone seems to be worried about the cost of it. What do you make of this debate?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I would hesitate to back is the idea that a long document is necessarily a measure of a bad document. Sometimes in terms of kind of having ease of compliance. Actually, when you lay out black letter law, a longer document can be better. The big barrier to understanding the National Construction Code, and the reason that organizations like ours aren't able to do the work here, is actually the Australian standards that the code references. Those standards are behind an arbitrary paywall. Flavio Menezes has done some really great work on this and on getting rid of this. The reality is that we can't actually see a lot of what the building regulations are, because you have to pay, for instance, $1,700 to read the documents to understand how to install a rooftop solar panel, as one example. And that's just to read the documents. So in terms of what we understand about the actual impact of the construction code, we can only know that if we have open access to the standards that are in our regulation. And it is, arguably sort of a violation of democratic principles that we have these regulations that are hidden behind a paywall. And I think that should be a number one focus in terms of enabling organizations like ours, like the UDAA, to actually do a comprehensive look at the National Construction Code, because it simply isn't possible right now.
Well, I think you might find that evidence ends up in a Senate report coming to a place near you soon. Okay. Senator Ananda Raja.
Yes, a couple of questions to Jonathan. Jonathan, can you just talk us through how urban agglomeration, which I take to mean city densification or densification, full stop, helps drive productivity?
Yeah, sure. So what we roughly know from the research, top level, is that productivity rises 2 to 5% every time a city sort of doubles in size. That's a substantial effect. But you also get wage premiums from working in the city and whatnot. There's a reason people move to the city, and it's about density of opportunity. It's because when I'm in a city, I don't just have access, for instance, if I'm an accountant, to one accounting firm. I have access to a ton of accounting firms and a ton of businesses who might need internal accounting staff. So what that means is that I'm making a lot more weak ties across my social networks, across my professional networks, and I'm able to share information faster. I'm able to change jobs faster. I'm able to find my right fit and my right community. And that leads to more productivity, more idea generation. Idea generation happens in the cities, right? The history of, complex manufacturing has not been, particularly in the regions, it's been in the cities where there's a lot of people and a lot of people combining their different skills. So when we think about urban agglomeration, what we're thinking about is people maximizing their options in order to find their best possible fit within society. And if we have the largest number of people finding the best possible fit, what we actually have is the best possible nation. And Australia is really kind of like freakishly urban. 88% of Australians live in urban settlements, 2/3 in our capital cities. You can compare Australia, 65% of Australians live in cities over 1 million. That's compared to 45% of Americans and Canadians, or 29 to 35% of Europeans in major European countries. So we have this really exciting thing of our cities, and that's what makes our economy really huge.
So what do we need to do as a committee, as a government, to try and improve densification, particularly in our cities? I mean, I don't want to create this region-city divide, right? That is a false dichotomy. We're not talking about that. We basically just need to build more homes, full stop.
That's right.
But if we want to have a particular focus on urbanized areas that are already have a critical mass of people, then what do we need to be looking at in terms of
Senator,
policy levers?
I can give you an
What's
answer
your
that
wish
actually
list?
answers things for both cities and for regions. Look, the reality is that we have constraints on our cities. Sydney butts up against the Blue Mountains, Melbourne, the Dandenongs. Other cities have similar constraints, right? There are real constraints. But the main constraint on our city's growth is actually artificial. It's us saying you can't build homes in a given area. You can't build to a certain height. You can't subdivide unless you use, in some areas like Albury, you need 6,000 square meters in order to subdivide down using their compliant development pathway. 6,000 square meters is a lot of land.
Yeah.
So we have these strong restrictions, and actually The restrictions on the cities are very bad and they are stopping agglomeration from happening. But the restrictions are actually tighter. So YIMBY Melbourne made a submission to an inquiry into the supply of homes in regional Victoria. And what we found is that cities like Ballarat, Castlemaine, and Mildura, which are also experiencing housing crises, they are even more restrictive. It is even harder to build housing in regional areas under a lot of regulatory scenarios than it is in cities. So this is actually a solution that very much plays across both. This is absolutely, like you said, it's not cities versus regions. It's actually about maximizing people's choice. There's a lot of people who would like to live in the regions, would like to work in the regions, would like that lifestyle, who currently can't get it because of these artificial restrictions. So the reality is that we need to make it legal to build housing. The way the federal government can do that is by essentially incentivizing the states to make these changes, to, increase the capacity, maybe say, for instance, that you can't restrict development below 3 stories, for instance, so we can build townhouses on all of Australia's residential land. That would be a big start. That would be great for regions, it would be great for cities, and it would be great for Australians overall.
In terms of the beneficiaries of urban agglomeration, who do you think they are in terms of demographic? Are they going to benefit everyone, or is there a particular focus on young people? Who are the beneficiaries?
Everyone is a beneficiary when we manage to grow the pie of the Australian economy. The reality is that if we are more prosperous, we can redistribute better to people who have had an unlucky go of it. When we are more prosperous in our cities, our regions benefit from the technology that we're able to import, right? We export, for instance, a lot of iron ore, and then that iron ore goes to China and it gets manufactured into Teslas, which we then bring back here, right? There are a whole number of kind of exchanges that are happening via urban agglomeration, via us being able to grow our wealth, grow our prosperity as a country, and then be able to share it across everyone. That's why we have a redistributive tax and transfer system. But it is only through sort of leaning into our strengths, which is the sort of 85% of our economy that isn't primary industries, that we enable ourselves to grow the pie. And that's what we should be leaning into. A good, standard principle is to spend more on what you're really, really good at. And that is the best way to keep going. And Australia is incredible, actually incredible at building cities.
In terms of, this is my last question in this block, Chair, but in terms of your constituency, I'm assuming you have a lot of young people who are interested in the work you do. What are they telling you with regards to housing and their preferences?
Yeah, young people are making a set of trade-offs, right? Every home buyer makes a set of trade-offs between location and square footage, essentially, square meterage of their home, right? And a lot of young people really find it beneficial. If we're thinking about that kind of agglomeration theory that we talked about earlier, young people are the primary beneficiaries of living really close to the city because they're still figuring out what their career will be. They're still figuring out what their best fit will be. And so a lot of young people are really, really keen on having the opportunity to live in the city. There's also a lot of young people who would very much like the house and home package on the fringe. There's a lot of young people who would like to, Geelong is booming, for instance, out of Melbourne and so on. The point is to maximize the choice. And some young people really want to figure out what they want to do. And then once they have figured it out, maybe they make a different decision. Maybe they stay in the city. A lot of young families stay in the city. The fastest growing LGA that isn't a growth area in Melbourne is Melbourne's CBD. And that's where the most number of kids are. And it's because it's where we've built the most number of homes. So I really think leaning into the idea that we should enable young people to make the choice, because they're not a homogenous group, but they are an ambitious group, and they are the group who will steward the country into our sort of more productive future, get things going. But the answer to that is to enable them to live in the cities.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Grogan.
Thank you, Chair. I might start with the Australian Community Housing. Can you just put on the record for us, the humans here, stable, affordable housing is not just about bricks, and it's not just about social policy. It's about a lot of different things. And I know you and I have had this conversation. I think it would be really valuable to just pop on the record your perspective on that, and what, social policy and economic productivity are not distant, untalking critters. Like the combination here, the joint value.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. Look, our members, like anyone else, like to get homes on the ground in the right place for the right people as quickly and efficiently as we can. But our primary focus is actually about the people who are living in those homes once they're built. And there's absolutely no question that there is clear evidence that if you have a safe, affordable and secure home, your ability to participate economically is far greater, whether that's because your kids get to get a decent education, whether you get to participate in the workforce, whether you have access to healthcare. All of these things have a clear impact on those families and their ability to be part of the economy. Now, our focus is not about getting them to be part of the economy, but it's an outcome, absolutely, of this work.
Because obviously a person's ability to fully participate, to go to work, we have this argument and debate quite significantly around, the impact of various things to increase productivity, but increase people's experience of their own lives and their well-being. The more we get, childcare settled into a pattern where people can access it across the country, the more people can return to work, and the more it sort of boosts productivity. But housing is the sort of baseline of that. If people don't have somewhere stable to live, their ability to engage in the workforce, in all sorts of things, in education, is significantly depleted.
Oh, absolutely. And what also happens is that we have too many people falling into what I would call acute care services. So, this is the same across almost every social service. If we can do enough preventative work, and in our case, housing is a really strong prevention that prevents people from having to access acute care services, where, as I said, whether they're health services, whether they're other kinds of services, it's really critical. And the more we can do early to help people get stable accommodation, the more they're able to access a range of activities within the economy, and that's better for all of us.
And what evidence do we have for this connectivity between social and community housing and productivity?
Look, there's been a range of studies that have been completed around the investment in preventative healthcare or preventative services and the outcomes around that. I'm happy to provide some examples of that to the committee.
I wonder if I could ask each of the witnesses to turn their minds to that and provide us some information on notice.
Pardon me, Senator, what was that you wanted on notice?
The Secretariat can send you through some stuff just following off that conversation, but essentially the connectivity piece between social and community housing, that social policy piece in terms of productivity. It's not just, I think sometimes the productivity argument gets very chopped off as this is all about regulation and tax and what have you.
Right.
But there is that piece that says for so many people having a stable house, being able to then access work or education, the connectivity between the social and economic policy in terms of driving productivity.
Yeah, and for the record, UDIA National absolutely agrees with what Mark's saying, and those points are very well made, and it's points we've made historically all the time. We're very big fans of getting people into housing, whether that be affordable, social or at market housing for home ownership and rental, stable rental.
Yeah, so it's the right house at the right time, isn't it?
Correct. It's diversity of options.
So last question for you, Mark. What role should community housing play in the supply side conversation? Like when we're trying to build supply, what's that pipeline piece that we need to be considering?
Yeah, look, unsurprisingly, I would say that community housing's got a central role there, and the reason for that is that we're now facing into a housing crisis that's been decades in the making, and I think what we now need is a really substantial response. So when you're facing into that issue, what you need is to be able to pull every possible lever that you have available to you. federal government obviously has a role in housing policy and housing funding, and it's been great to see that occur in the last few years. State governments and local governments also have a role to play. What the community housing providers can do is provide another avenue for those homes to be built and for those tenancies and communities to be managed. We receive government subsidies, but we also leverage finance. We borrow on our own back. By small investments, we can leverage them into larger investments, more homes on the ground. We need to be able to pull every lever right at the moment to get as many homes on the ground as we possibly can, and we're well placed to do that part. We manage about 160,000 homes across Australia, so that's a large amount.
I think a lot of people don't understand your financing model and how you actually do it, because you're quite different. Do you want to just give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, look, there is not a single financing model within the community housing provider, but a typical development would be part of a land or equity provided by CHP, a government subsidy that could be either through a long-term availability payment, rent concession, and or subsidy, and then we would typically raise a proportion of the development costs through finance, whether that's through a Housing Australia financing vehicle or through commercial senior debt finance.
And then the future of that housing?
The difference for us is that we're all not-for-profit community housing providers. We hold our properties in perpetuity to the end of their useful life, and even then we recycle them, build them again, and hopefully provide more housing over the long term. So, certainly one of our central arguments is that subsidies to our sector are held within the sector and held for perpetuity to provide housing for social and affordable housing for families that really need it.
The gift that keeps giving?
We think so.
Thank you.
I think Senator Nataraja has one more.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, were you still going?
You keep going, Karen. Just finish.
Sorry, yeah.
I was actually going to go to UDIA now.
Yeah, keep going.
So if you've got a follow-up question, and Michelle?
No, I wanted to just ask Jonathan a question at the end. All good. You keep going.
Cool. So in terms of the NCC freeze and the EPBC, you have said that they are beneficial in the past. Is that correct?
Yeah, we still maintain that they're beneficial.
Can you just step out for why you think they're beneficial? I know there was some commentary earlier about the EPBC not having delivered anything. I would argue, given that it's been held hostage in the Parliament for so many years, it's actually making some breakneck speed changes now. But obviously that takes time, as I think you outlined. What do you see the benefits, particularly from the EPBC?
Well, let's start with EPBC. We are a highly regulated industry, and let's leave aside for the fact that regulation and tax creates cost and delay. A little bit of regulation to tell people where things should go and what they should do is good, because you want to have standards. In terms of the environment, we get told what to build, when to build, where to build it. So if there is a difficulty in the environmental sense, from our industry's point of view, our main concern is making sure that we have clarity up front, simple decision-making, efficient processes, without having to get into endless debate or conflict, and without having needless and repetitious requests for information. So we are all about clarity, we are all about transparency and about accountability. In terms of the EPBC, what that means is that we need something that is simple, clear and a one-stop shop, so that we don't have to be continually going forward with other people. We are creating housing for everybody. It is a time lag on housing already. When we've got additional delays in EPBC, etc., that is going to just blow everything out. So from our point of view, we need to make sure that these actually work, which is why we are highly supportive of getting the EPBC done properly. As I was saying before, part of the issue, though, is making sure that the culture works in a way that industry and the new EPA actually understand each other and know what they're going to do. Very, very simple example. Just knowing what an impact is and what offset will actually deal with that impact is actually a very fraught question at the moment, because there is no clarity on that. Those are things that we need to get clarity on. There's only so many rules you can make. If I give you a very simple thought exercise, if the industry understood the EPA and the EPA trusted and understood the industry, you could probably write the EPA in a couple of lines, which would basically be balance environmental safety with housing productivity, right? Because everything else really comes down to how you actually process it. So that's the first part. In terms of NCC, you absolutely need regulation for certain things to make sure that you are building to a particular standard, that everyone's building in a certain way, and that there is compliance. The problem is when you get to a point where you have so many rules and you have so much complexity that the average person and the average small business is unable to deal with that, or you have experts debating with each other what the meaning is going to be of the next proposal, that's a problem. Now, again, we are highly supportive of both of them, but we're also highly supportive of everyone being accountable, transparent. One of the biggest things you could probably do for productivity across the board is to have metrics and KPIs to be able to manage and identify performance, so that you do actually have accountability and transparency, so that every single bureaucracy, whether it be environmental, planning or whatever, has to look at it through a lens of affordability and practical application and outcome, as well as the targets, which we are highly supportive of, because the targets tell us how we're doing, and that's the only way we're going to get better.
Great. Thank you. It's very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Sandra Nandarajah, last question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Apologies for the noise. My neighbour's renovating. Jonathan, with regards to densifying our cities, wherever they may be, including in the regions as well as metropolitan areas, you'd be familiar with our policy suite. Could you perhaps reflect on what we need to either modify, what other new measures we should consider? I'm including at state level, not just Commonwealth level, but state level as well, with regards to turbocharging supply.
Yeah, so obviously one of the limitations that the federal government finds itself facing is that constitutionally it's hard for you guys to bind decisions about land use. But luckily what you guys have is all of the money. So one of the things that we really advocate for you guys to do is to sort of essentially help the states make the decisions that actually are in their best interest, but might be politically challenging, right? That might face some local opposition, might face some minority kind of upset, to actually be able to push ahead and help state treasuries, state planning departments to make the decisions that they know they need to make in order to enable housing in our cities. Now that involves, for instance, setting up contingent funds, contingent grant pools, those sorts of tools that are very, very familiar within the national competition policy frameworks and funds. And the reality is that you need to look at the evidence around land use. Now, every state has its own system, but there are things that you can do. There are sets of policies that play across the board. Things like minimum lot sizes, height restrictions, dwelling count restrictions. Good example is that, like, South Australia, for instance, I believe is the only state that has a single story zone, right? A zone where you can only build a single story of housing. This seems pretty silly, and this seems like the kind of thing that the Commonwealth government should probably come in and say, hey, actually, if we're going to be serious about, solving the housing crisis and building homes where people want to live, maybe a single story zone on the edge of the CBD is actually not something that we think is viable. And the same would go for other cities. It seems like 2 stories right on the edge of the CBD, where I can walk to Flinders Street Station from a place where it is only legal to build 2 stories. This doesn't seem like a very good way for us to be building our cities. And I think the Commonwealth should have a stance on that, and a stance that says, actually, we need to balance the long-term wealth and the long-term good housing outcomes for our city against these kind of hyper-local, subjective, poorly rationalized policies that essentially have been enacted since the 1970s and have stalled housing production and put us in this place now where we have a chronic housing shortage. So the Commonwealth needs to have a stance on land use, and they need to use the tools in that competition policy framework and funding in order to help states make good decisions.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So look, we will now adjourn and return at 1:40. Thank you very much for your time. The committee is what's the word I'm looking for here? Is suspended.
Thank you, Senator.